your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, thanks for joining us for our Week in Review. Officials at the City of Calgary have laid charges in connection with an E. coli outbreak which hit several daycare centres and sent a number of children to hospital. The catering company and school lunch delivery provider Fueling Minds is being charged with operating without a proper license. The company could be fined up to $120,000. This follows 351 lab-confirmed cases and 37 secondary cases of E. coli, which came from a shared kitchen the daycare centers were using. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Mark Jaffe, says meatloaf and vegan loaf meals were most likely the source of contamination.
Unfortunately, neither of these items could be tested, as they were either eaten or discarded before this outbreak was identified. While we now have a likely source, what we do not know exactly is what was contaminated or how.
As of midweek, Jaffe said 4 children still remained in hospital and the investigation was ongoing. Several dozen people on a west to east trek calling themselves freedom activists met in Medicine Hat last Monday. Some of the group who are against the use of SOGI, which is the sexual orientation and gender identity tool used in some schools, are continuing on a cross-country journey heading east, hoping to gain support. Ron Clark, who hosts a podcast called Freedom Advocate, says he's not calling himself the organizer of this movement, but he did put out a call on social media telling his followers he was leaving Calgary September 25th, driving to Medicine Hat by noon that day before heading to Saskatchewan, then onward toward Ontario. He's not saying what the destination is, and he's not calling it a convoy.
Well, it's not really the Freedom Convoy 2.0 or whatever the case may be. It's standing up to protect this country and the children in this country. People are fed up. They've had enough. You know, even back in January, February of 2022, when the Freedom Convoy did go across, and it shook the nation across this world, but we were never heard. Nobody ever came out and listened to us and wanted to know what our demands were.
Okay, so what questions do you want answered this time?
Well, they're not my questions, okay? It's their questions. It's the people. It's the citizens of this country that are, you know, they want Justin Trudeau removed. No more coalitions. They want transparency. They want the SOGI removed out of the school.
So far, Clark and his followers plan to make it at least as far as Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario by this weekend. A judge has approved a partial settlement in a class action lawsuit against the Calgary Stampede that accuses the organization of allowing a staffer to sexually abuse young boys. The settlement involves an admission of negligence and breach of duty. During his time with the Young Canadian School of Performing Arts, which performs each year at the Calgary Stampede Grandstand Show, Philip Harima admitted to using his position to lure and groom 6 boys into sexual relationships. The offenses took place in 1992 and again between 2005 and 2014. Harima received a 10-year prison sentence in 2018 after pleading guilty. This week, the judge approved the deal in which the Stampede agreed to pay 100% of the damages. Well, the Alberta government is expanding low-income transit programs in 6 new communities across the province. Officials say the extra $1.7 million in additional funding will not only help support those in Edmonton and Calgary, but also cities such as Lethbridge, Red Deer, and Spruce Grove. Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says the province wants to do more to help those from low-income households obtain transit passes.
Now, we can serve more Albertans and support those living in smaller communities outside of Edmonton and Calgary. Low-income transit passes are just one way that we are helping individuals and families on a tight budget. We have paused the 13% per litre provincial fuel tax through the end of the year. And through our inquiry into renewables, we are seeking long-term solutions to be able to lower Albertans' electricity bills. In my Department of Community and Social Services, we are supporting nearly 12,500 households through our rent supplement programs, and work is underway through a $9 billion investment with our partners to build 25,000 new affordable homes across our province by 2031.
Officials say more than $14 million has already been allocated for low-income transit passes, including $6 million each for Calgary and Edmonton. Up next, Alberta's premier continues to push hard for an Alberta pension plan similar to what Quebec has. After the break, we dive into the study that needs to be completed first. According to recent polls, a large percentage of Albertans do not want to pull out of the Canada Pension Plan in favor of an Alberta plan. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says the province will be having a study completed to look into the issue more. Premier Danielle Smith has also suggested a referendum will be held on the subject. Here's Hal Roberts and Tyler Dawson with more.
A big topic of discussion around Alberta water coolers is how our province is considering leaving the Canada Pension Plan in favor of an Alberta-made plan. Now, a report by LifeWorks, formerly known as Morneau Chappelle, says that Alberta was due around $334 billion, or about 53% of the CPP's total assets. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post. Tyler Dawson joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, will Alberta actually get that much? More than half the pot? It seems a little high.
Yeah, that's one of the big questions right now. The way that LifeWorks came up with this calculation is that when the CPP was created by law back in 1966, there was a sort of formula devised for any province that decided to leave. And basically, the idea was that you could walk away with whatever your contributions had been minus whatever had been paid out. So, province had put in $1,000, they decide to leave, but they paid out $50, they'd get, $950 back. So that's sort of how they ended up at this number. But as you say, it's a colossal number, and CPP Investments, the board that oversees the Canada Pension Plan, basically said that this is made up math. It's not going to happen. That's an outrageous amount of money, so on and so forth, which isn't totally surprising. I mean, some of the other provinces, BC has spoken out on this, and I believe Newfoundland and Labrador have as well. And they basically said, this is how can 11 or 14% of the population walk away with 53% of the total assets? So it is maybe sort of the opening gambit. This is what we want, but we'll be happy if we get, some smaller number. But that number makes it look pretty good. But there's certainly considerable debate, I would say, over whether or not Alberta is actually going to get that if it goes down this road.
And there are rumblings coming out of Pierre Poilievre's camp that he's not happy about hearing that Premier Smith is pushing to have Alberta opt out of the CPP. They say this will give Prime Minister Justin Trudeau some ammunition, saying that he will save Albertans' CPP.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting sort of dynamic here. One of the things that's been on my mind through this is is this a really good piece of policy, or is this a policy that's being developed as a way to sort of negotiate with the federal government in some way or poke them in the eye in some way? Because, of course, this all came out of the Fair Deal panel, right? Which was about sort of seizing more power for Alberta, but also had the political agenda of sort of sticking it to the federal government a little bit. But some of the rumblings from the Poilievre camp are sort of like, gosh, this is the sort of thing that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau can campaign on. I mean, he's had pretty rough polling numbers for the last little while, but if he can go to Ontarians and people in Manitoba and the Maritimes and BC and say, look, I'm going to protect your CPP. If I'm reelected, Alberta's not going to abscond with 50% of the CPP. That's a pretty good political line for the Liberal Prime Minister, and something that is certainly causing some concern among folks who hope to see Pierre Poilievre become Prime Minister.
Now, Tyler, Premier Smith says she would hold a referendum on the issue of going out on her own with a pension plan, but the latest polls show that most Albertans are really not in favor of leaving the CPP.
No, and not only are most Albertans not in favor of leaving it, very few people who identify themselves as UCP supporters are even in favor of it. There was polling back during the election that showed about 21% of Albertans thought leaving was a good idea, and about 33%, I think it was, of UCP supporters thought leaving was a good idea. Now, there's this middle group of people, I think it was about 25%, who just weren't sort of sure. The plan has always been kind of vague. This is the first time we've really seen a number from the government on what sort of money they think they could walk away with. what sort of reduction in premiums they think they could get away with if Alberta started its own pension. So I think there's the possibility we could see some movement in those numbers over the next year, because of course Jim Dinning, the former finance minister, he's got a panel that's going to be looking into this and consulting with Albertans, and he's going to report back, sometime in the fall next year. So things could move a little bit in the polling, as more information comes out, as it's studied and things like that. But you're right, it is going to come to a referendum. The New Democrats certainly see this as a winner. They campaigned against it in the election campaign, even though Danielle Smith didn't really campaign for it during the campaign. So it's, I think, going to be a hard road for the UCP, no matter what, because it's kind of hard to identify who these supporters are, where they are, and whether or not they can sort of overcome the fear that people are going to have that they're going to lose out on their CPP if this goes ahead.
Next, we take you on the road to a special place that's sacred amongst the Blackfoot people. When we come back, we show you the petroglyphs of Writing on Stone Provincial Park. Welcome back to our Truth and Reconciliation show. We are on location at Writing on Stone Provincial Park, and joining me is Rebecca. She's my tour guide today. Rebecca, thanks for actually bringing us into the park here. This is amazing.
Awesome. It's really my pleasure. This is a really special place, so I'm glad that we could spend some time here together.
It really is, and my understanding is it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Correct, yeah. So in 2019, this area received a UNESCO designation for outstanding universal value and as a living cultural site. So this place is most associated with the Blackfoot people. It's likely that there have been other First Nations people for whom this place is important as well. But really we are in the heart of Blackfoot country. And this place has always been known as special to the Blackfoot people. This is still a place where people come to visit to connect with this remarkable place.
Yeah. Oh, it's so easy to connect with the land. Like it just feels almost so spiritual when you're here. It's just beautiful. And you have brought us to this amazing spot where there are actually pictographs, petroglyphs right around us. Maybe you can show us some of these.
Sure. I'd be happy
right
to.
now.
So like you mentioned, there are both carvings and paintings, so petroglyphs and pictographs. So some are incised and some are painted using red ochre paint. And if you want to come this way, I'll just point out a few of the markings.
Wow, look at this.
The markings do extend for about 1 kilometer, and they're most concentrated here in this section of the park. That is a restricted access zone, and that is for their protection. Sadly, there has been problems with graffiti and vandalism, so that's something that we're really trying to educate people that is not appropriate for here. The markings that we find right here are very distinctive, and we see lots of individual people who are holding these great big round shields. So
almost like in a circle there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So these are very large, heavy shields that would be used for protection. And shields were very important in the past, but they also give us a clue to the age of the picture, because with the introduction of rifles, the shields were less effective. And so usually when we see pictures of shields, that tells us that predates contact with European people. So probably these are more than 300 years old. And there are definitely some that are much older than this as well. So that's one of the ways we can tell the age of the pictures is by what's in the picture. If you see a picture of a gun or a picture of a horse, you know that those are a little bit newer because those were introduced by European people.
So it's almost like a little history book right there on the wall.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
And so, but even going back much further, some of the markings here are probably close to 2,000 years old. And I'll just show you another example. If you look up here, there's another picture of a shield, but it's almost been erased by the weather. Wow. You can see the bottom of the shield right here, and one leg there and one leg there of the warrior. But time has taken a toll and erosion is happening all around us.
I was just going to say, good old erosion.
Yeah. So those would have been even older than these. So there have definitely been people here connecting with this place. This place has always been known as sacred to the First Nations people. And this is considered a place where you could connect with the spirit world. So The ochre pictographs are kind of an exciting area of research in the park because using new technology we can enhance the visibility of some of the paint that is quite faint.
Oh, wow.
So here we can see, using computer software, that we can see a lot more detail on these warriors with their shields. This one you can see has a headdress. This one, where you can hardly see it with the naked eye, but with the enhancement, you can see a lot more detail. So their head is painted, their legs are painted.
Here we can certainly see the passage of time, can't we?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So for many years it was assumed that these vehicle pictures were made by maybe early settlers or the Northwest Mounted Police that were in this area. But there was a person who really was an expert in the markings, and he started to think that maybe these were made by a Blackfoot artist. And so he kept investigating and doing research, and he ran into somebody who had a photograph that really helped to solve the mystery. So this photo was rediscovered, and it is a picture showing a Blackfoot elder named Bird Rattle carving these vehicle pictures.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for being my personal tour guide out here at Writing on Stone.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for coming.
It's just been fascinating being shown these writings and just kind of understanding the meaning behind them. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but after the break, as these writings are being protected and preserved, so too is the Blackfoot language in our region. And we're going to dive into that next. Welcome back. Well, just as these writings behind me are being protected, so is the Blackfoot language, as communities across the region are about to see some original Blackfoot names come back to life. A project aiming to resurrect the Indigenous language through the use of signage hopes the initiative will enrich the landscape, invite people to take an interest in the history of our region, and move closer towards reconciliation. But according to Arnold Fox, who is the Director of Social Development for the Blood Tribe here in Southern Alberta, it's sad that many First Nations are losing their languages. Take a look. Well, it is Truth and Reconciliation Week, and we are honoring the Indigenous people and taking a deeper dive into the culture, including the language. I'm pleased to have Arnold Fox joining me today. Arnold is the Director of the Blood Tribe Social Services. And welcome, Arnold. We're so grateful to have you with us today.
Happy to be here, Jeanette.
Okay, so why don't you maybe start off by telling me a bit about what you do, what your work kind of looks like over there at Blood Tribe Social Development?
Okay, well, in relation to the Blackfoot Signage Project and in relation to the Blackfoot language, our department stepped forward to host what we eventually called 8 Weeks Language Committee. So 8 weeks means Blackfoot speaking. That's what that phrase, that word means, 8 weeks. So we're the speaking language group. And the task that was given to us, it was instituted a little over 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. The major part of our task is to help preserve the Blackfoot language and to help the language itself move along and adapt to current terms that are used today in our everyday language. So that's why it's a dual function. We realize that a lot of First Nations across the country are losing the language. I believe there's some dire predictions that within 25 years, we will just have 3 First Nation languages still functional in Canada.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's quite astounding once you think about it. And I grew up with the Blackfoot was the first language, and I can't really envision not being able to use that or not giving it to our children and our grandchildren to be able to carry forth. The committee itself has 10 to 12 elders who come together once a month, and we offer an annual symposium, Blackfoot Language and Symposium in Lethbridge. It's the most convenient location. There are some representations from other Blackfoot nations in the area, Blackfeet in Montana, the Pinchot Nation near Pincher Creek, and Siksika near east of Calgary. So those are the Blackfoot-speaking nations in North America.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yes, Yeah. So out of that, I would say I'm being optimistic by saying 20% of us still use that language on an everyday basis. So it definitely is in fear of dying at a certain point or not being utilized. You know,
Yeah.
we're realizing now with the programs that we offer, even in social services, we offer short-term employment training for our clients. And we have fully realized over the years that one of the modules they take is the Blackfoot culture and the Blackfoot language. I used to take for granted that our younger people had this opportunity to learn at home and all of that, but that's not the case. We were, in my generation, we were lucky that there was a very limited amount of influence from media. So the everyday language we heard all the time was Blackfoot.
You were mentioning that they're predicting there could only be 3 Indigenous languages left. How many are there? I mean, there must be hundreds, right?
Well, yeah, if you stop to think there are 500 plus different First Nations in Canada, start to get an idea. Of course, there's regional, you know, like the Woodland Cree have a big area in most of the provinces. So that language I know will survive because there's a lot of speakers over an extended geographical area. But once you start, like I said, becoming too insular, you don't have that opportunity. And in our population too.
To see my full interview with Arnold Fox, you can head on over to our YouTube page or our website, bridgecitynews.ca. We also hope you enjoyed tagging along with us to riding on Stone Provincial Park in that previous segment. After the break, it's no secret Alberta had an exceptionally dry summer, but did it have an impact on our crops? That's coming up next. Alberta dealt with quite a bit of drought this summer, but how much of an effect did it have on our crops? Our own Hal Roberts chatted with Sean Haney, owner of Real Agriculture, about some of the challenges farmers faced this growing season. Take a look.
Sean, what kind of yields did farmers here in Southern Alberta experience this year?
Unfortunately, Hal, it's another one of those poor years. Really, a lot of Southern Alberta, Highway 1 South, and a little bit north of it even, very, very drought-stricken throughout the growing season. I would say that a lot of the yields came in at expectations, but let's just put it this way. Expectations were very, very low. The hope is that the irrigated crop is going to come through. I was talking to an agronomist yesterday who said the silage corn crop in Southern Alberta is phenomenal, maybe the best she has ever seen in her career. But there's only so many irrigated acres. We continue to be really caught in this dry bias, this drought cycle that we just can't seem to really, really break. And we're going to need a lot of fall moisture here to break us out of this and hope for a better season in 2024.
Now, were there certain crops that thrived a little bit more than others, considering the dry growing conditions we had? Crops like maybe corn, perhaps?
I think if you look at some of the dryland crop, it's really kind of a bad situation across the board. You know, canola really needs some of that moisture. I think the one thing that maybe helped us a little bit, it was cool early on in the growing season, and so that bought us some more time. Unfortunately, the rain never did come. It's kind of amazing some of the yields that we have seen, given how much it did not rain. And that's the crop situation. There also is some of the pasture quality that is obviously a big concern to a lot of the ranching audience that is out there. And once again, it's the same story. We need some fall rain here to really give us a bit of a chance for next year.
So, Sean, how has the carbon tax really impacted many of our agriculture producers? What have you been hearing?
I think it's no secret, even though we've seen Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food Lawrence McCauley say in the House of Commons just last week that he says that farmers support the carbon tax. Any of our audience that we talk to will say that they do not agree with that. I've got some survey data very much saying the exact opposite of what the minister is saying. there's a lot of hope here that Bill C-234 is going to get royal assent here this fall. The Senate has definitely been holding some hearings and committee meetings this week discussing it. This is the private members bill that would basically make some farming activities exempt from the carbon tax, grain drying being one of them, heating of livestock barns is another example. And as we move into the fall season here and into winter, there's a lot riding on this, and that's going to be a help, although farmers, I think, overall are still very, very much against the carbon tax.
Thanks so much for your time today, Sean. That was Sean Haney, owner of Real Agriculture, joining us from Lethbridge.
The Lethbridge School Division held its first board meeting of the new school year on Tuesday. Some parents were in attendance over concerns with the division's sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression policy and procedure, more commonly known as SOGI. Viviana Lartiga is a parent who appeared before Tuesday's board meeting. Lartiga says she and many other parents who expressed concerns over SOGI at the June 27th board meeting received the same form letter response by email. She asked the board for a more personalized response, though, to address her specific concerns.
I expressed my concerns over two policies: their sexual orientation, gender identity policy, as well as their anti-racism and anti-oppression policy. And the reasons why those two policies concern me is because they are both based on theories that can be quite harmful to our children and to our schools as a whole. And I also expressed at the very end a request for the board, in collaboration with parents, to hold a town hall meeting to further the discussion so all stakeholders can view or express their concerns, not just me, as the public forum is not a great venue for engaging in a collective group of people.
The next board meeting is slated for October 24th. Our Lethbridge veterans are being honored once again with a special banner project around the city. The Lethbridge Salute Our Veterans banner project sold a total of 80 banners last year as they were set up around different spots in the Windy City. This year, 50 more were sold compared to the first year of the campaign.
We are now starting to put up, in time for the 1st of October, a number of banners throughout the community, expanding on the locations from last year, including on the west side, down by the hockey rink, and on the north side, Winston Church and School. We have a number of banners on Exhibition Way, which ties into the significant history of the exhibition and the military since the First War.
Officials say the deadline for banner submissions was earlier this summer. Details on how to sponsor a banner for 2024 can be found on our website. When we return, we examine how Bill C-47 is affecting local health stores. We'll be right back.